morning. You'll notice that we don't have a moderator. We were supposed to have a moderator who'd ask us questions and so forth, but the person who was substituting seems to have lost her voice, and so we are not having a moderator. We're going to try and conduct the session as friends and rivals together. So there we go. Let me start by moderating and asking Arvind to introduce himself and his work.
Well, you know, we are, can you hear me? Is the mic all right? Well, the reason I'm here is because I've translated a book called Songs of Kabir, just as Farrukh is here because he's translated Rumi. So we are both here, I think, as translators. And speaking for both of us, we've translated poets who have been translated before. So certainly Rumi has been translated before, and Kabir has been translated before many times. Farrukh will, of course, talk about his translation of Rumi. I can only speak about my translation of Kabir. Kabir would be familiar to a lot of people in the audience. I don't think there's anyone who would not have heard of Kabir. Just to introduce the man, we know absolutely nothing about him. It's just nothing. All we can say is that he lived in the 1500s, probably lived in Banaras, and he was a Muslim weaver, but Hindus being Hindus, they want to give him a Brahmanical birth, as Hindus always want to give everyone a Brahmanical birth. But it was from a family that had recently converted to Islam. So that is all we know about him. And he was part of a larger movement. I call it movement, which is a later construct. But he was one of the many bhakti poets who arose in North India, also in Maharashtra, also in South India, all over the country, in fact, from about the 7th, 8th century onwards. All the poems ascribed to Kabir are fake, in the sense not a single of one poem can we say with any certainty that they have been written by Kabir. That is, we are absolutely sure of that. We cannot, not a single, not a line, not a word can be authenticated as Kabir's. So the whole thing is a fabrication. The whole thing is a myth, that there are hundreds and thousands of poems ascribed to a man called Kabir. That is all we know. And the other thing I wanted to say was, the other thing I wanted to say was, just sit down, why don't you sit down? The other thing I wanted to say was that Kabir is still being composed. People are still doing Kabir poems. So it is not a dead tradition. People are writing Kabir poems, people are singing Kabir poems, and as people write and sing Kabir poems, they introduce a lot of modern words. Is that clear? So it's not, the language is not stuck somewhere in the 1500s. For instance, there are Kabir poems that mention the word station as in railway station, line as in railway line, and engine as in a railway engine. With a diesel or steam, I'm not very sure. But certainly, the engine metaphor is there. The railway station metaphor is there. Now, when I was translating Kabir, I was translating not modern Kabir, I was translating poems that were from manuscripts, but available in printed editions. The question I faced for many years is, do I introduce modern words into the translation or not? Are you getting a sense of what do I introduce a word like megaphone or this, or do I introduce a word like chromosome? Now, Kabir would certainly not have used the word chromosome in the 1500s, but in the 20th century, someone did use station and line and engine. So when the original Kabir poet was composing a new Kabir poem, ending with Kahat Kabir, the ending is always the same, Kabir says, or, says Kabir. The question was, do I introduce these modern words, replace old metaphors with new metaphors, or do I stick to the old, what the text says? And I, at some point, decided that I'm going to introduce new metaphors into the translation, which kind of express the same idea. So the idea was not violated, only I was using a new metaphor to express that idea. The other thing about Kabir, I don't know about Rumi, but the text keeps changing. So you don't have a fixed text. So each text comes in 4 or 5 different versions. So when I was translating Kabir, I decided to create another version of the same song, only my version was in English. So this is the background. And I'm sorry, there is, can we get this? Can we ask? Now, at some point, I don't know, we haven't discussed this with Farrukh, but at some point we can read some later on, after you've spoken, should that how we do it? I'm saying we can talk a little bit about these two, and then talk generally, but we would like to end by reading some poems. So we can read a little later after Farrukh has. Yeah. Yeah, or we can, whenever you want a reading, just raise your hand and we'll read a poem. So after you finish. Oh, yeah, I've done 5 minutes.
Right. Let me start not with Rumi, but with a very brief introduction to Sufism and why I wrote a translation of Rumi. I was on my way to Australia and somebody gave me a book of Rumi translations in English. I'd heard of Rumi, of course. I'd heard it recited, but I'd never known an English translation. So I'd heard it in Urdu, of course. I'd heard Qawwalis based on it and so on. I read this English translation. It was absolute rubbish. It didn't rhyme. It was an American translation, so you can imagine. There was no rhyme to it. There was no rhythm to it. And the metaphors were all completely mixed up, Suddenly elephants became rocks and rocks started laying eggs and God knows what. So I went away quite disillusioned with it. When I came back to Bombay, I asked my Mamaji, my mother's brother, is Rumi a lot of rubbish? And he said, how dare you? And started reciting it in Persian. And when he started talking, reciting Rumi by heart in Persian because he spoke Persian, I said, what the hell does it mean? So he started telling me what it meant, at which point I took a pen and paper and started writing down what I thought he was saying. And then I said, hang on, this is rhyming poems. And he said, yes, it all rhymes. The whole Mathnavi rhymes, 24 volumes of it. And I said, and it seems to be in a particular rhythm. Say that line again. And he went, ta-dum, 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 ta-da. I said, that's iambic pentameter. Shakespeare's lines, a few hundred years before Shakespeare. I said, that is the rhythm in which he's writing. He said, yes, it's all like that. I said, okay, then the translation has to be in iambic pentameter, and it has to rhyme, and to hell with the Americans and Madonna's translation of Rumi. So I began the work asking people who knew Persian, because I don't, to translate it into Urdu, and then read some English on it, and that's how the book comes about. It began then to influence me to read about Sufism. And Sufism is the aspect of Islam that really has come to the subcontinent. Lately, of course, the influence of Saudi Arabia and Wahhabis and petrodollars has distorted the emphasis of Islamic history into something else. And that Wahhabism can only be combated by currents within Islam itself. In the 8th century, the Sufis, beginning with Ghazali and other people, began to interpret a mystical Islam. They said Islam is not a rule of a load of laws. Islam is closeness to God. We are as close to God as God's jugular vein is to himself. God is within us, we are within God, and it began when it came to India in the 9th, 10th, 11th century. It began to echo something of the Atma, Brahma, duality or singularity of Advait Vedant. And the subcontinental Sufis, the Chishtis, and the, Moinuddin Chishti and, Shah Jalal, they were Sufis who interpreted particular surahs of the Quran, which can be interpreted very easily as this mystical entity of Islam, of God being one with people, and there not being juridical laws. They don't go, the Sufis, strictly by Sharia law. They are not for beheading people. They are not for chopping people's hands off. They are not for crucifying Christians. They are for a closeness to Allah and to carry on a jihad which is within oneself. The jihad is the purification of the heart, not the beheading of Jews or Christians or Zoroastrians. So when Sufism was born, there was the tradition of talking about God as somebody you love with all your heart. And the beloved became God, but in the 14th century or the 13th century, with Rumi and with 100 years later a poet called Hafez, whom I am about to read to you in my translations, this conflation between the lover and God became extremely confused and close. So some people like William Jones, the English scholar who translated Hafez, says Hafez is talking about a woman. Other people say absolutely not. He is talking about God, but when he says the beloved, it could mean a woman, it could mean God. So let me read you some of Hafez's quatrains, which I haven't published. They are in the process of being written. I've written several, and no doubt will write some more, because the publishers always make heavy demands on you. They say, this 80-page book is no good. We want 200, otherwise it won't sell. Okay, here. My eyes are full of visions of your face. Your ways, the only paths my feet can trace. You bless creation with your gift of sleep, yet keep my mind aloof from sleep's embrace. A draught of wine will set you on the way. Don't quarrel with the devil. Do not stay. Though he will try and tempt and keep you here, my beloved, come with me. Don't delay. The heavens took you from me, and the theft has robbed me of all signs of joy and left my lips without a smile, my empty heart. Only he and I know how bereft. A friend, some wine, the finest things in life. The longing that her kisses were as rife as the wounds with which she bled my poor heart. O surgeon, come again and wield your knife. The other metaphor that the Sufis always use is that of wine. being intoxicated, of course, in Hafez's case, meant taking a draught of the exhilarating Soma, but, and so possibly with Omar Khayyam. But when Khayyam says, "Awake, my little ones, and drink the cup before life's liquor in its cup be dry," he doesn't just mean, let us get drunk on alcohol and fall unconscious. He also means, let us absorb ourselves in God's grace. Over to.
I think what attracted me to Kabir more than anything else is that he was against all forms of established religion. So anything to do with the outward appearance of religion, whether it is a pilgrimage place or it is a holy book, whether the Vedas or the Kitab, by Kitab he means the Holy Quran, or it is the sacred thread, or it is keeping fasts, or it is going to a temple, or it is going to a mosque. He kind of rubbished the whole idea of established religion. He not only rubbished it, he kept at it over and over again. So this anti-establishment dissenting voice is what attracted me to Kabir. And that dissent was equally against the Muslims and the Hindus. There's these two communities that the poor man had to deal with. The Muslims, interestingly, are never called Muslims, they are called Turk. So in the Hindustani, when he says Turk, you know what he's talking about. And against the caste system, this was his other big opposition, because he himself came from the weaver community. So there was a whole group of poets over 2 or 3 centuries who were from the lower castes. So they were weavers, they were cobblers, they were tailors, they were servants, a servant maid. All of them had the whole bhakti idea, the nirgun, the worship of the formless God, is that basically God who, whether it's a he or a she, the it, that person resides inside you, and whatever outward form you choose is really meaningless. So I'm going to read out some of Kabir's anti-establishment religion. The other thing to remember when I read these poems is that he does refer to Ram and he does refer to Hari. He has to refer to God in some way. But the Ram and the Hari of Kabir is not the Hindu Ram or the Hindu Hari. It's nothing to do with Hinduism whatsoever. So I'm just trying to, against Pandits and Muezzins. This is this section in the book from Songs of Kabir. I'd say this through a megaphone if I had one. Look at these men, shaven heads, great big earrings, ash-smeared bodies. But inside, they are empty as a house that's been cleaned out by thieves. And look at these others in the best part of town who forget that when death slips its noose round their necks to drag them through the streets, it won't be pretty. I live in fearless Berg, Kabir the weaver says, its builder, Ram. He's also a poet who's obsessed by death. So death is a constant presence. If going naked brought liberation, the deer in the forest would attain it first. If a shaven head was a sign of piety, ewes would be pious too. If holding back the semen brought you closer to heaven, a steer would lead the way. Without Ram, says Kabir, there's no salvation without Ram, says Kabir. Not to know it is really dumb. tonsured monks and dreadlocked rastas, to idol worshippers and idol smashers, to fasting Jains and feasting Shaivites, to Vedic Pandits and Faber poets, the weaver Kabir sends one message: the noose of death hangs over all. Only Ram's name can save you. Say it now. He's also any number of poems against Brahmins and against Pandits. They were his great enemies. Oh Pandit, your hair splitting's so much bullshit. I'm surprised you still get away with it. If parroting the name of Ram brought salvation, then saying sugarcane should sweeten the mouth, saying fire burn the feet, saying water slake thirst, and saying food would be as good as a belch. If saying money made everyone rich, there'd be no beggars in the streets. My back is turned on the world. You hear me singing of Ram, and you smile. One day, Kabir says, all bundled up, you'll be delivered to Deathville. And a couple of these last two poems, that I can read some others later on if we have the time. One is against the caste system. And it's a very powerful image he has. He's telling the Brahmin, if you are a Brahmin, then is there another passage? Is there another birth canal for Brahmins and a separate birth canal for non-Brahmins? Were the Creator concerned about caste, we'd arrive in the world with a caste mark on the forehead. If you say you are a Brahmin, born of a mother who's a Brahmin, was there a special canal through which you were born? And if you say you are a Turk and your mother's a Turk, why weren't you circumcised before birth? Nobody is lower caste. The lower castes are everywhere. They are the ones who don't have Ram on their lips, says Kabir. I just wanted to say before I close that the word he uses for circumcision is the word that is the common Hindustani word, which is khatna. I don't know if Bangla is the similar word like khatna. He says, to bhitari khatna kyun na karaya? कि भीतर पेट के अंदर ही खतना हो जाना था. अगर तुम तुर्क हो और तुम्हारी माँ तुर्क है, if you are a Turk and your mother is a Turk, then the circumcision should have been done inside the womb. Because once you come out, just anyone can get circumcised. So
carrying on from Kabir's denunciation of juridical Islam and ritual Brahmanism, I could say that all the mystics, including all the Sufis, including Rumi, were against the outer forms of religion. Here are two small verses which demonstrate Rumi's contempt for formal rituals. Do not praise and magnify the mosque. However beautiful, it is the husk and not the grain. Go seek the holy saints. By delving in their hearts, the soul acquaints itself with where the fount of life resides and where the light of Him alone abides. A brief quatrain. The Muslim and the unbeliever share this world of joy, this world of shame and care. Beyond, there is a place without Islam or disbelief. Come, let me take you there. Instead of reading all the philosophical works and comments, let me read you a couple of poems which demonstrate a completely different side of Rumi. The first one, not so much. The first one is spiritual, but the second one is a narrative story, which is, well, it's a bit risky. So let's see. The first one is called The Word. Zuleika had a secret. Every word or phrase she spoke in secret ways referred to her beloved Yusuf. If she said, "The moon is out tonight," she meant instead to say she loved him. When she said alo or spice or bread, her confidants would know that it was code for Yusuf. Every phrase a tribute to his beauty and his ways. You could say, and by now you may have guessed, that Zuleika lived a life that was obsessed with Yusuf. She had turned the very gift of speech to magic, making meanings drift and making words say what they never meant. The blandest phrase turned to sentiment and thoughts and praise of Yusuf. When she cursed aloud, she meant she wanted time reversed to once again the hour they last met. When parting made her words turn to regret, his was the name that every morning burst from her lips and quenched her every thirst. His name would warm Zuleika in the cold, and just so all believers should be told that when you seek salvation for your soul, you merge into the ocean of the whole. So lover and beloved are the same. Your Zuleika is merely Yusuf's name. And even though your linguist thinks it odd, all pronouncements are one. The word is God, the syllable that permeates all things, exploding stars and songs the robin sings. Right now, a story poem. And in between all the religious and philosophical Sufi poems he wrote, he also wrote parables, little stories. Here's one called Nasu. A man named Nasu, soft of feature, was often mistaken for a female creature. Satan filled his head with lies and promises and suggested he disguise himself as a woman and find employ in the princess's bathhouse. Oh, what joy he could derive shampooing the women's hair and massaging their bodies. What nefarious pleasures he would undoubtedly derive with a permanent hard. What a way to be alive. So Nasu did just that. He spent his days in lustful heaven, to Satan be praise. Except that soon he heard the voice of his own guilt, which whispered, Nasu, you are damned. You built your pleasure dome on quicksand. It could sink. If you are caught and executed, think. And forswear Satan, shun the horned beast who leads to famine disguised as a feast. Hearing this, the young Nasu turned to pray, acknowledging that he had lost his way. He sought the advice of a Sufi guide who said that men who ran could seldom hide. The Sufi said that prayer would intervene and show him pleasures he had never seen. Nasu, though chastised, felt like a trapped cur. Next day, the bathhouse was in a mighty stir. The princess was missing a pair of pearls. The suspects were, of course, the bathhouse girls. The poor girls were told that they'd be whipped if they did not submit, so they were stripped. Nasu was shampooing a lady's head and feasting on this naked female spread, and losing concentration, Nasu dropped the shampoo kettle, and his client stopped, looking in the mirror, and turned round, and Nasu knew that he would now be found out, and began running towards the door, when the head eunuch said, none can leave the floor till I say so, and you take off your robe. The game was up. The attendant would probe his body and delve every orifice. The eunuch asked Nasu, now, what's amiss? The only way out now was to confess that he had several times seen the princess, naked as a blossom from toe to tits, a crime for which he would be chopped to bits. His heart sank as though it were made of stone. His stomach cramped. He felt very alone. And just as he surrendered to his fate, a eunuch shouted, "Found them! God is great!" So did he dodge the executioner's sword. And did he drop and give praise to the Lord? You bet. He prayed, "I thought my time had come. Forgive, forgive." But Nasu was struck dumb. He would forever be downcast, alone, knowing only he knows what he has known.
Okay, I'll read 4 or 5 short poems. No parable in this. They are just poems obsessed by this thing that obsessed Kabir right through his life, which is the fact of death and the constant presence of death, even as we live and as we enjoy ourselves and we attend lit fests. Me shogun, me bigwig, me the chief's son, I make the rules here. It's a load of crap. Laughing, skipping, tumbling, they are all headed for Deathville. In the blink of an eye, says Kabir, the king will be separated from his kingdom. There is a reference to Ravan in this, the sort of the demon in the Ramayana. To get a big head is easy. Food on the table, cash in the pocket, and you walk with a swagger. Be street smart, and you can rake in twice as much. But money's like the leaves of a forest's trees. You didn't bring it with you when you were born. It won't go with you when you die. Greater kings than Ravan have vanished in the blink of an eye. Parents, children, wife, you leave them behind. You must be mad, says Kabir, not to sing of Ram and to screw up your life. Weep. This is a poem that, why... I won't explain the poem. All I'll explain is that he uses this metaphor, which is used quite a lot, where the number 5 is used, and 5 are the 5 senses. So when he says 5, he's actually indicating the 5 senses. Weep because a loved one's dead, but death comes to everyone. Tomorrow it could be you. Smelling of aftershave and deodorants, the bodies are dried up well, with a frayed rope and a broken pulley and 5 water carriers crowding its mouth. Open the inward eye, says Kabir. It'll make the well disappear, the water carriers too. While you are busy perfuming your body with sandalwood, someone else is chopping the wood for your funeral. A kite string in your hand, pan dribbling from your mouth. You forget that when you die, they'll truss you up with rope just like a common thief, and put you on the pyre to burn. Can't you see that Ram is the only truth, says Kabir, everything else a monstrous lie? And just three more, the last three of these death poems. 12 years were to childhood lost, 20 to youth, middle age took care of the rest. It's too late to have regrets. You built a dike, but the stream had dried up. You enclosed the field, but there was no crop to save. You ran out with the snaffle, but already the horse thief had gotten away. Bedridden with a stroke, you make a rattling sound and wish to make amends. You leave this world, says Kabir, picked clean. And yeah, this is the last one. There was one word that intrigued me because according to Kabir, there are 10 months that you spend in the womb. And so for a long time, I didn't know why Kabir was saying 10 months. And then I looked up, some books, and I realized he was talking about the lunar months. So if you look at it from the lunar calendar, then it is 10 months rather than 9. Strutting about, a smirk on your face, have you forgotten the 10 months you spent in a fetal crouch? Cremation turns you to ashes, burial into a feast for an army of worms. Your athlete's body's only clay, a leaky pot, a jug with 9 holes. As bees store up honey, you gathered wealth. But after you are dead, this is what's said. Take away the corpse, it stinks. Standing at the door, your wife will say her farewell. Others will say theirs outside the gate. Or hitching a ride, show up at the burning hut. After that, you are on your own. Lost, without Ram on your lips, you are a parrot stuck in the fowler's net, says Kabir. Who can you blame but yourself?
Rumi is, apart from his knowledge of the Quran, often his work has been called, the Mathnavi has been called the Quran in verse. Now, that may be so, but he also alludes to the older books to which Hazrat Muhammad alluded, to Moses, to Musa alayhi salam, and to Isa alayhi salam. And I'll read you 2 of the poems that Rumi wrote about Moses and about Jesus. First one, Moses is the shepherd. Moses once passed a shepherd at his prayer and paused to hear this simple man declare his love for God by promising to tend to the Almighty's every need and lend him all the comforts that he could afford, promising milk and honey to the Lord. Hearing which, Moses flew into a rage. He asked the shepherd, how can you engage in idle bribes and chatter in this way with him infinite? And how dare you pray to God as though he was some needy friend? Stop offering those silly things and bend your body and your mind in total awe and pray as you were taught to pray. No more of babbling about baubles to the King of all the heavens, that infinite thing which surpasses all our worlds and resides beyond the light of 1,000 suns. Besides, you must know that we mortals have no right to involve God in our miserable plight. So saying, Moses left the shepherd and went on to prophesy to all the land. Then God breathed these words into Moses' ear. You know that shepherd, you were too severe with the poor man. He wanted to convey his love for me. So he began to pray. And what he said came straight from his heart. You must have heard he was willing to part with anything he owned or thought would please. What better worshippers are there than these? To tell the truth, Moses, prayer has no form. Like inner lightning, shapeless as a storm, in its sincerity resides its force. No other value shapes this intercourse. Then Moses sought the shepherd out again to admit that he was in error when he interrupted him and specified how he should pray. Then on that same hillside, both Moses and that joyful shepherd knelt, and each offered a prayer that was heartfelt. And here's one, a parable about Jesus, Isa and the fools. Isa the healer, to him all praise, had the word from God, which was able to raise the dead and breathe life into a wraith, not to crowd the planet, but to bring us to faith in the living God. But he walked with men who were self-seeking in their depth and deeply insincere. They pressed him for the formula. They begged him for the word, the mantra that would raise the dead and by him be heard. So Isa, in his innocence, whispered it to those jackals who were present when Lazarus arose, and gave to all of us, the doubting human race, faith in the eternal life, faith in Allah's grace. These jackals, jubilating, went through a desert full of stones and came across a scattered pile of whitened, unbleached bones, sun-bleached bones, when one of these self-seekers, more foolish than the rest, thought he'd put the formula and Isa to the test. He uttered the dreaded word of life while facing to the east. And from the bones there came alive a predatory beast who ate the entire company, the miracle maker too. Now Rumi, that's the story, but the moral must come through. Isa was no magician. His miracles weren't magic. The fools who deny Allah, their ends will be farcical, tragic. And of course, he talks about the Quran and Hazrat Muhammad. He says, mirrors. The Prophet said, the faithful are mirrors to each other. You in subjugation are no better than your brother. To seek solace in humankind is the way of fools. Earthly loves are shattered mirrors, or are but mangled tools. Right. Another one to the Quran. The Holy Book says, if the sea were to become ink and all feathers quill pens, O mortals, do not think a syllable could be written to displace the word given to the messenger and subsequently heard by writers and poets whose words must, alas, fade, leaving only his truth, which at your feet is laid. Shall we open it to questions if anybody wants? You've got 10 minutes more.
1 hour time or 40?
Yeah, 1 hour. Does anyone want to ask anything or demand anything from either of us? Keep reading.
No, I think,
You're impatient to go.
There's another thing over here.
Oh.
Do we have time? Do we not have time? Do you have any idea?
Okay.
Let's see whether there's time or not. Someone wants to ask a question.
Here's a love poem. This fairyland of love is a country to cry for. Getting lost in you is a loss to die for. I said, I will make love to you, then fade upon the air. She was appalled and said, don't you even dare. Arvind, you want to go?
No, I think if there are any questions, you will.
Yeah. Anyone? Yes.
I just want to say something about something which is very Bengali. The mystic minstrels of Bengal, the Pauls. Of late, we've always been reading Rumi in whichever form we've managed to do so. But of late, I see a strong resonance of what you're saying in the philosophy of the Pauls, who, again, the same spirit from within. And maybe that they should be added to the list of philosophers and poets. Thank you.
Yes, we agree. Any other comments? Or, sir? Rumi and Persia. I can't speak Persian, and I know which are the famous ones which are translated from Persian, about roaming in the bazaars, bhi gardam, but I wouldn't even risk Persian pronunciation, even though I've had to repeat it to myself while doing the translations. Do you know Persian, sir? No.
Could you tell us something about the influence that Tabriz had on Rumi, and how was it true that Rumi became more creative and wrote more? Shams Tabriz.
Shamsu Tabriz. Well, the conversion of Rumi took place through the mystical influence of somebody who turned up. The story goes like this. His father, Rumi's father, was expelled from Persia because he was professing Ghazali's and other people's Sufi doctrine. So he was chased out of the king's court, where he was an Islamic mufti, because he was for Sufism in a form, not quite formed yet, right? And he was expelled, and he went to Turkey, which was at the time under the influence of Rome. It was part of the Roman Empire. That's why Jalaluddin is called Rumi. He comes from Rome. So Rumi was actually named Jalaluddin Muhammad, but he lived in Rome, so he's called Rumi. What happened was, he carried on his father's lecturing about Islam, scholastic Islam. And one day, he had a pile of books by the side, and he was lecturing to a group of people about Islam, when a man who looked like a tramp walked in, and Rumi carried on with his lecture, and the man sat down and suddenly interrupted the lecture and saying, "What are those?" to the book, to the pile of books. And Rumi said, "You wouldn't understand what these are, right? That you're a stupid fellow, you wouldn't understand what these books are." So the man sat quietly, Rumi carried on with his lecture, and suddenly the books caught fire. And there was a big blaze of the books. And Rumi said, "Oh my God, what is this?" And the man stood up and said, "You wouldn't understand what this is," and walked out. And Rumi was influenced to follow this man and found out that he was in fact called Shams-u Tabriz. He was from Tabrizi in Persia, And he induced him, he said, who are you? What are you doing? What was that about? And for 40 days and nights, Rumi and Shamsu Tabriz stayed enclosed in a house in which it is said he imparted his wisdom or whatever it was to Rumi. They both came out dancing like whirling dervishes, which is where the tradition of the whirling dervishes in Sufism arises. And Rumi from then, seen by some of his disciples as gone crazy, right, began to preach Sufism and the closeness of God in your heart rather than somewhere in the abstract heavens. That's the influence of Shamsu Tabriz. And of course, later on, he writes a poem to Shamsu Tabriz, because Shams left and went away. And he writes one poem which is really touching. I don't know where it is, yeah. You have left me bereft. I think it's one of the last ones. I don't know whether I can find it. Yeah, he says, you've left me. He says, it isn't aimlessly through streets and bazaars that I wander. It's for a glimpse of her, my love. Intoxicated, I squander my time like a vagabond, weaving idle rings around my lover's haunts. And yet consciousness clings to that one purpose. I beg you, have mercy on me, Lord, a sinful wretch distraught. How can broken hearts afford to be still? A million souls delved in this ocean's swell, searching in their hearts for the pearl inside the shell. So come, my love, be kind to him they call the Maulana of Rome, who is but the slave of Shamsu Tabriz, a wanderer without a home.
আর কিছুক্ষণের মধ্যেই আমরা শুরু করতে যাচ্ছি বিভিন্ন ধরনের অনুষ্ঠান। প্রথমটি WOW5, যেটি অনুষ্ঠিত হবে মেইন স্টেজে। দ্বিতীয়টি মডার্ন ডান্স, যেটি অনুষ্ঠিত হবে কেটিভি স্টেজে। তৃতীয়টি ফ্লাই অন দ্য উইংস অফ ওয়ার্ল্ড, যেটি অনুষ্ঠিত হবে কফিন স্টেজে। আগ্রহী দর্শকদেরকে বিভিন্নভাবে অনুরোধ জানানো যাচ্ছে নির্দিষ্ট স্থানে ধন্যবাদ।
Rumi has like some Tabriz. Who would be Kabir's guru? Is there any mention of guru?
No, there is you see, we only have stories. And one story is as good as another story. So he wanted Diksha, but since he was a low caste, no Brahmin would give him Diksha. So it is said that Ramanand, he laid down on the steps in the ghats in Banaras. And so Ramanand didn't see him early in the morning, that there was, someone lying on the steps. So he stepped on Kabir, and then Kabir suddenly got up. And then I think Ramanand was remorseful that he had stepped on a sleeping man and said, what do you want? And Kabir said, to give me Diksha. So, but we don't know when Kabir was born, when he died. Ramanand's dates are unfamiliar. So it's not very clear. But Ramanand is the only person who has, it is said in the stories that he was his guru, for whatever that means.
In his songs or poetry, is there a reference to a guru like in...
Though there are hundreds of references to gurus, but the whole problem with the Kabir text is that everyone changed the text according to what they wanted the text to mean. So when Kabir might say the beloved, some scribe would replace the word beloved with guru. What I'm trying to say is that it's not a stable text. So you will find hundreds of references to gurus, whether Kabir, since we don't know what Kabir wrote, the general suspicion is that a lot of words were changed to suit certain sects. like the Radha Swamis in India, the Radha Swamis adopted Kabir as one of the line of gurus. And one of the texts was published by by a man from the Belvedere Press, 1908, who was a Radha Swami. So when he printed the Kabir manuscript, he changed the words for beloved or God to Guru. So that is
I was concentrating on one point. This poets, Rumi, Kabir, whatever, are they totally concentrate their works in love, beloved, and did they anywhere wrote about humanity for the supporting the common people at large, or they concentrated their works in love? Love to God, love to fiancé, love to anybody, love to mother. Love can be of any sort. But beyond love, where they concentrate their life. May I please have some note on that? Thank you so much.
As far as I know, from all the poems that I heard and the ones that I had to choose from, there was never a very earthly message in Rumi. It really was all about love, and he uses the poem, the metaphors of wine, of love, of closeness to the beloved, of water, of the sea, of pebbles, of pearls, all this. There never was, even though I looked for it, any kind of socialist message. I would have liked there to be, but there wasn't. He never found a closeness to the people of the earth, or in fact any poem or care about the suffering of people. He never thought about that. He just said, if you want to live a good life, life's purpose is closeness to God. That was it. Kabir sir?
It's difficult, you know, apart from the fact, I must say this, that unlike Rumi, Kabir wrote in the local language. There was the vernacular. It is not a classical. So this was the big break that all the Bhakti poets made, that they were writing in a language which, as Marianne Moore said, in plain American, that cats and dogs can read. So he was writing in a very plain, simple language, which we didn't require. This was the whole point of the Bhakti poets, that they wrote in the vernacular rather than in Sanskrit. So that was the common touch, if you want to speak.
Okay, I think we bring the session to an end.
Thanks so much.
I would love for you to read one of his dohas in Hindi. Could you?
You would like me to?
Kabir ke dohe, yeah.
One of the dohas in the actual.
A person Hindi.
You know, these are not dohas, these are poems. So I can certainly try and read a few lines.
For the even mother tongue. Thank you.
Well, this is I've just opened it at random, and this is a very common metaphor that is there in Rumi, and it is there in Kabir. It is there that the poet has gone mad. He's lost his bloody mind. And the family is now worried, where is the next, who's going to put food on the table? And Arun Kolarkar translated one of the Tukaram, and he tells his wife, he addresses his wife, and then says, this is only the beginning. What you are suffering, this is the beginning of your suffering, because I'm going to go, I'm going to get wilder and wilder in my love of God. Tanana bunana tajjo Kabir Rama naam likhi liyo sarir. Kabir has given up the loom. Musi musi roe Kabir ki mai e barik kaise jiva hi khudai. Jab lagi daga baho behi tab lagi bisro Ram sanehi. Kahat Kabir suno mere bhai puran hara tribhuvan rahi. that I can either hold, he says, I can either hold the thread of the shuttle or the thread of Ram's love in my hand. I can't do both things together. I can only have one thread. And I've chosen Ram's thread rather than the weaver's thread. Thank you.
Within a very short time, we are going to have two different programs.